What happens when the woman who controls a billion-dollar portfolio can't control the one thing that matters most? Charlotte Reeves had built Crestline Capital from a two-person advisory firm into one of Atlanta's most formidable private equity houses in 11 years. She had restructured failing companies in 4 countries, testified before the Senate Finance Committee twice, and appeared on the cover of Forbes 3 times before her 39th birthday. She did not panic. She did not lose her composure in public. She did not cry at the office, not even the afternoon her father died mid-conference call, and she'd finished the call before stepping out to grieve. She had learned early that the world gave women in finance exactly one chance to be seen as emotional before it stopped seeing them as competent. So she had chosen competent every single time for 11 years. That discipline had cost her a marriage. It had cost her friendships. She hadn't noticed fading until they were gone. And it had given her a daughter named Willa, who was 6 years old, spoke fluently at home, and had not said a single word to another human being outside their apartment in 14 months. The pediatric psychologist called it selective mutism, anxiety-based, treatable with time and the right environment. Charlotte called it the thing she couldn't fix, which made it the most terrifying problem she had ever faced. She dressed Willa carefully that Thursday morning, a pale green dress with small white flowers, the one Willa had pointed to herself when Charlotte held it up. That mattered. Willa communicated in other ways, pointing, nodding the small hand squeezes that had become their private language. The silence was not emptiness. Charlotte had learned that much, but it still hollowed her out every time she watched her daughter's mouth stay closed in a room full of other children. The Ellsworth Atlanta was already buzzing when they arrived. Crestline Capital's annual investor summit had grown over the years into something between a financial conference and a performance. 200 limited partners, 40 staff members, a catering team that charged more per hour than most attorneys. The hotel's grand ballroom was being transformed even as guests arrived, scaffolding and lighting rigs and men in black shirts speaking into headsets. Willa gripped Charlotte's hand and pressed against her side. "I know," Charlotte said quietly. "A lot of people. We'll find a quiet corner." There was no quiet corner. There was only the controlled chaos of her own event consuming the entire floor, and Willa's fingers tightening around hers like a small, steady anchor. Charlotte's assistant, a sharp-eyed young woman named Sloane, materialized at her elbow with a tablet and an expression that meant problems. The AV team needs a sign-off on the keynote deck. The Hartman Group's rep is asking to move their lunch slot to 11, and the florist delivered the wrong centerpiece's white orchids instead of cream. The head of events is spiraling. Tell her cream and white look identical under ballroom lighting and to let it go. Charlotte glanced down at Willa. "Can you find somewhere for her to sit? Somewhere away from the speaker's setup? I have the small anteroom off the registration desk. It's quiet. I can put her there with her tablet." Willa had already read Charlotte's face. She looked up with an expression that was not quite fear and not quite resignation, something more complex than either. The look of a child who had learned to anticipate separation and had decided to be brave about it anyway. Charlotte crouched down, ignoring the fact that her heels made this awkward and that 2 board members were 20 feet away watching her. "I'll check on you every 30 minutes, I promise. Sloane will be right outside." Willa nodded. She held up 3 fingers. 3 times before lunch, Charlotte confirmed. "Deal." She watched Sloane lead Willa toward the anteroom, and then she turned and walked toward the crisis of the day, and the one after that, and the one after that, because that was what she did. And maybe that is the quiet truth of Act 1 of any parent's life. Children rarely need us to be perfect. They only need to know with certainty that when they hold up 3 fingers, someone will count with them. The man's name was Andre Whitaker, and he had no business being at the Ellsworth Atlanta that morning. He was there because the hotel's service elevator had gone down 2 days before the summit, and the facilities manager had put in an emergency call to a contractor he trusted. And that contractor had sent Andre because Andre was the best elevator mechanic in the city, and also happened to hold a current EMT certification that he'd kept up for 12 years out of habit, or maybe out of the same instinct that made him keep a first aid kit in his truck and always know where the exits were. He was 38. He had a daughter named Zora, who was 4 and who could talk. God, could she talk? She had been talking in full sentences since she was 2 and had not stopped since. She talked in her sleep, sometimes soft little monologues about dinosaurs and the color orange and what she wanted to be when she grew up, which changed daily. Zora's mother had left when Zora was 8 months old, a decision that had gutted him and that he had spent 4 years quietly making peace with, because Zora needed a father who was present, not one who was still bleeding. He was a tall black man with calloused hands and a tool belt and a face that was honest rather than handsome. The kind of face that showed every hour of outdoor work, every early morning, every decision he'd made to do the hard thing instead of the easy one. He was working on the secondary elevator shaft when he heard the small, rapid footsteps. The service corridor on the 3rd floor was not supposed to be accessible to guests. The door was supposed to be latched. Andre had noticed it wasn't when he arrived that morning and had meant to tell someone. He had not gotten to it yet. The girl slipped through the gap in the door and stopped when she saw him. She was maybe 5 or 6 in a pale green dress, dark-haired with the wide and slightly unfocused eyes of a child who had been overwhelmed and had walked until she found somewhere quieter. She looked at him the way a deer looks at a person. Not hostile, not friendly, just assessing, deciding whether this was danger or not. Andre set down his torque wrench slowly. "Hey there," he said. He kept his voice low the same way he'd learned to with Zora when she was overtired, when loud was the enemy of calm. "This corridor is a little confusing. Easy to end up here by accident." The girl didn't answer. She didn't run either. He didn't ask her name or where her parents were. He had a theory about that, about how adults always leading with those questions made kids feel like problems to be solved rather than people to be talked to. And notice what he did instead, because it was the whole secret hiding in plain sight. He took the spotlight off her. Every adult Willa had met in 14 months had waited for her to speak, and waiting is its own kind of pressure. Andre simply removed the audience. Instead, he looked back at the elevator panel and said conversationally to no one in particular, "You know what's weird? People trust elevators completely. They step in without thinking. But basically, it's a steel box on a cable. And the whole reason it works is because of about 47 different parts all doing their job at exactly the right time. It's actually pretty impressive when you think about it." He glanced sideways. The girl had taken 2 steps closer. "Every part has a name," he continued. "Some of them are boring names, but some of them are great. There's one called the governor. It's the part that stops everything if things get too fast. Just puts the brakes on the whole system." He paused. "I think about that sometimes. Wish people had one of those." The girl was beside him now, looking at the open panel with its layered mechanics. She reached out, then stopped checking his face for permission. "You can look," he said. "Don't touch the wires on the left, but the rest of it is fine." She looked. For a long moment, she was completely still, studying the machinery with an attention that reminded him of Zora when she found something genuinely interesting. That particular quality of focus that meant a child had forgotten to perform and was simply present. He reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small hex wrench, clean unused, that he'd grabbed that morning. He held it out on his palm without comment. She took it, turned it between her small fingers, studied the hexagonal tip. "It's called an Allen wrench," he said. "Or a hex key. Same thing, 2 names. That happens a lot with tools. Like the things existed long enough that 2 different people decided to name it, and neither one knew about the other." She looked up at him when he said that. It was the first time she'd made direct eye contact. He didn't make a big deal of it. He looked back at the panel. "My daughter likes to organize my tools when she visits the shop. He said she sorts them by color instead of by size, which is completely wrong and also makes her very happy. So I leave them that way until she goes to bed and then reorganize them after." There was a pause. "She sounds nice." The voice was small. It was also absolutely real. The girl had spoken, and the words were clear as anything. And the expression on her face immediately after was one of total surprise, as if she had not decided to say it, as if the sentence had just come out carried by something involuntary. Andre did not freeze. He did not exclaim. He kept his eyes on the elevator panel and said in exactly the same unhurried tone, "She's the best person I know, and I know some pretty good people." The girl was quiet for a moment. "Then I don't talk usually." "Okay," he said. "My mom says it's okay that I'll talk when I'm ready. Sounds like your mom knows what she's talking about." Another pause. "She knows a lot of things. What does she do?" A small frown, like she was deciding how to answer. "She runs a company. She has lots of meetings. She worries about me even when she's in the meetings." She said it matter-of-factly, the way children report complicated truths without judgment, without drama. "I can tell because she checks her phone more when she's worried." Andre nodded slowly. He was thinking about Zora, about the particular grief of being a parent whose child carries something heavy, something you can't just take from them and carry yourself. "She sounds like she loves you a lot," he said. "She does." A pause. "She doesn't always know how to show it the way I need." He looked at the girl, then carefully. "You figured that out." She shrugged one shoulder. "She tries, though. Every day she tries." He thought that was one of the more generous and precise observations he'd heard in a long time, and it had come from a 6-year-old. "What's your name?" he asked. "Willa." "I'm Andre." "Nice to meet you, Willa." She held the hex wrench out to give it back. He waved a hand. "Keep it. Consider it a souvenir of the service corridor." She closed her fingers around it. Charlotte noticed the ante-room was empty at 11:17 and the world stopped. She had Sloane on the phone before she'd finished crossing the registration area. Where is she? Where is Willa right now? She was Charlotte. I stepped away for 6 minutes. There was a vendor dispute. Find her. The next 12 minutes were the longest of her life. She covered the 3rd floor and the 2nd floor in the lobby, moving fast in a way she hoped looked purposeful rather than frantic. Her mind doing 2 things simultaneously. Running the logical grid of where a 6-year-old could go in a hotel, and also running the other thing, the animal thing beneath logic, the raw primal terror that had no name and no resolution except, find her, find her, find her. She pushed open a service corridor door that was slightly ajar and heard a small voice say, "She tries, though. Every day she tries." Charlotte stood in the doorway. Willa was crouched beside a man in a gray work shirt looking into an open elevator panel, holding something small in her fist. And Willa was talking, not mouthing words, not gesturing, talking in full sentences with the natural cadence of a child who did this every day. The man glanced up and saw her. He read her face immediately. The shock, the relief, the tears she was refusing to let fall. And he said quietly, "She found the service corridor on her own. She's been helping me check the panel." He said it like that, helping. Like Willa was a colleague, not a lost child. Charlotte walked forward and crouched down, not trusting her voice. And Willa looked up at her and said, "Mom, this is Andre. He told me about the governor part." Charlotte looked at her daughter's face, open at ease, holding a tiny wrench. "Hi," she managed. "She's great," Andre said simply. He was already turning back to his tools, giving them space, which was either the most perceptive thing a stranger had ever done or the most natural. She couldn't tell which. "Say something else," Charlotte whispered to Willa. Willa looked at her calmly. "I said a lot of things already." Charlotte could not explain what happened to her in the next hour. She went back to her summit. She gave her keynote. She answered questions about portfolio allocation and interest rate exposure and the macroeconomic case for infrastructure-focused PE strategies. She was precise and confident and said exactly what she meant to say, and beneath all of it, something was rearranging. She tries, though. Every day she tries. Her daughter had said that to a stranger in a service corridor, had said it not as a complaint, but as a defense, had chosen apparently unprompted to defend her. And Charlotte, who spent her professional life analyzing what motivated people, what they truly valued, what they said when they stopped performing, she could not stop turning that sentence over. She thought about the last 14 months. The pediatric appointments, the speech therapy intake form she had filled out in her car in a parking garage, and wept over before she could bring herself to submit it. The birthday party where Willa had pressed her face into Charlotte's side for 2 hours. The school drop-offs where Willa would walk in without saying goodbye, not because she didn't love her, but because saying goodbye in front of others was impossible. And Charlotte had learned to not look back as she walked to the car so that Willa wouldn't see her face. She had been trying. She knew she had been trying. But trying was not the same as being present, and she was not always sure she knew the difference. If you ask me, that may be the hardest lesson hidden inside this whole story. Because trying is something you do. Being present is something you are. And a child somehow always knows which one is standing in the room with her. Let that thought sit for a moment. After the afternoon breakout sessions, she went back to the service corridor. She did not know what she expected to find. Probably nothing. Probably he would be gone. The job done. The moment sealed off in the past like most moments were. He was still there. The elevator was nearly reassembled. "Thank you," she said, "for earlier. She hasn't spoken to anyone outside our home in over a year." Andre looked up. He considered his words the way she'd noticed he did. Not slowly, just carefully. She had something to say. She just needed a minute where nobody was waiting for her to say it. Charlotte absorbed that. "You have children. A daughter 4 years old. Zora single, yes." She didn't ask more. She knew she had no grounds to judge the shape of someone else's family. "She's lucky," she said. "Zora." He smiled at that, and it changed his face in a way she hadn't expected. Made him look younger and more open. "I'm the lucky one." She does this thing where she narrates everything she's doing out loud while she plays, like a nature documentary of her own life. I could listen to it for hours. Charlotte looked at him. She was, for perhaps the first time in 11 years, in a professional space with her guard entirely absent. Willa used to do that before the mutism started. She'd wake up in the morning and just start talking. Tell me about her dreams, what she wanted for breakfast, whether she thought clouds got lonely, whether they got lonely, he repeated. She was 4. She thought about things like that. "Maybe she still does," he said. "She told me she figured out something complicated about you in about 45 minutes of observation." Charlotte looked at him sharply. "What did she say?" He met her eyes. "That you try every day." There was a silence in the corridor that had a different quality than the silences before it. "I'm going to ask you something," Charlotte said. "And it's going to sound," she searched for the word. "It's going to sound like something a person says when they've lost their professional judgment." "Okay. Can I buy you a cup of coffee?" "Not right now. After this is done. Tonight, or this week, or whenever your schedule. Tonight works," he said without hesitation or performance. "Zora's at her grandmother's until Sunday. They had coffee in the hotel bar because neither of them suggested going somewhere else, and that felt somehow like the right choice to stay in the place where the day had happened, to not run from it. He told her about his business, a small elevator and mechanical systems company he'd built from nothing over 9 years. Just him and 2 employees, a careful and unglamorous business that kept buildings working and nobody ever thought about, unless something went wrong. He told her about the EMT certification, about the 2 years he'd volunteered with a county rescue unit before Zora arrived and changed his calculations about risk. She told him about Crestline, about the early years when she'd worked from a kitchen table and cold-called pension fund managers, until her voice gave out. About her ex-husband, briefly and without malice. They had wanted different things, and the wanting had diverged slowly enough that they'd both been blindsided when they finally looked up and saw how far apart they'd drifted. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The marriage, I miss the version of it I thought we were building," she said. Said, I don't miss what it actually was. There's a difference, he nodded. I know that difference. Your daughter's mother wanted something faster moving than I could give her, he said simply. She wasn't wrong about what she wanted. She was just wrong that I'd change. Are you glad she left? He thought about it honestly, which she appreciated. I'm glad Zora has a father who's actually here. Whether the way we got there was glad, I don't know. It hurt. It still comes up sometimes, but you stayed the same. I stayed the same, he confirmed. Charlotte looked at her coffee. She was aware that this man was the first person she had talked to honestly, not strategically, not performatively, not with any portion of her attention reserved for how this would land in a very long time, maybe years. She hadn't noticed the absence until this moment, sitting across from someone who listened the way he did with the particular stillness of a person who had no agenda. Willa is going to have good days and hard days, he said. But she's thinking in there, working things out. She told me her mother tries every day, and she said it like it was a fact she'd decided to be proud of. Charlotte's jaw tightened in the way it did when she was controlling something. She shouldn't have to settle for that for trying. She deserves. She doesn't think she's settling. He said it gently, but without softness. That's your interpretation. She said it like a compliment. Charlotte was quiet. You're very good at identifying problems, he said. I imagine that's part of why you're good at what you do. Is that a polite way of saying I catastrophize? It's an observation, not a judgment. He wrapped both hands around his mug. Willa isn't a problem to be solved. She's a kid who's figuring out when the world is safe. Today, she decided a service corridor with a mechanic in it was safe. Tomorrow, it might be somewhere else. And me. She already decided you're safe. She's just waiting for you to catch up to that. Perhaps that is worth carrying out of this act. Sometimes the kindest thing we can offer another person is not a question, not a solution, but a quiet space beside us where they can arrive in their own time. 3 months later, Charlotte sat across from her board in the Crestline conference room on the 42nd floor and laid out a proposal she had spent 6 weeks building. She was restructuring the firm's impact investment arm, creating a new fund for small business infrastructure loans companies under $5 million in revenue, the kind of operations that couldn't access institutional capital, that built things and fixed things, and kept cities functional that existed in the gaps of the financial system and were invisible to it. The numbers were solid. The case was airtight. She had run the models herself. One of the board members, a man named Calloway, who had been skeptical of every initiative she'd proposed in 4 years, leaned back and said, "What made you interested in this sector?" Charlotte thought about a service corridor, about a man with calloused hands explaining a governor mechanism to her daughter with the patience of someone who believed that what he was saying mattered. "I met someone who reminded me what infrastructure actually means," she said. "It's not the visible stuff. It's the 47 parts nobody thinks about until one of them fails." Calloway looked at her for a moment, then nodded slowly as if something had settled. The proposal passed. Andre got the call on a Tuesday in March. A contract for mechanical systems maintenance across 7 mid-sized commercial buildings in the Midtown corridor, a 3-year agreement, the largest his company had ever signed. It came through a referral network he'd never had access to before, which had opened quietly and without announcement a few weeks after a woman named Charlotte Reeves had mentioned his name in the right room. He didn't know that until later when she told him sitting in his kitchen, while Zora demonstrated her ongoing nature documentary in the next room. And now the lion, that's me, is preparing her very important dinner, which is a peanut butter. And the lion needs more jelly. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "I know," she said. "I wanted to." "There's a difference," he pointed out. And she looked at him with an expression he'd been learning to read over the past few months. The one that meant she was surprised to feel something she hadn't planned for. "There is," she agreed. From the other room, Zora announced that the lion was now ready for her dinner. And would the humans please come acknowledge the lion's achievement? Willa, who had been sitting beside Charlotte doing her homework here in this kitchen at this table, with the ease of a child who had decided this place was safe, looked up and said, "I'll go." She slid off her chair and disappeared into the next room. And they heard Zora's delighted shriek at the arrival of an audience. And then both of them were talking at once, two small voices overlapping. Willa asking about the lion's name, and Zora saying it was obviously Queen Zora the Magnificent. Obviously, what other lion name could there be? Charlotte sat very still, listening. Andre watched her face and said nothing, because some moments didn't need commentary. Outside, Atlanta moved below them 37 floors down from where Charlotte usually lived her life. Up here, it looked different. Smaller and more navigable, like a system of 47 parts. And maybe that is the small gift this story leaves behind: the people and the moments that hold a life together are rarely the loud ones. So tonight, if there is someone in your world who is quietly doing their part, working, waiting, trying every day, let them know you see them. It costs nothing, and to the right person it changes everything.